Hello and welcome to Global Review. In this program, we present to you top global stories, how the world is being made by our efforts and how we are going to contribute in terms of having this new idea of moving together. Today in our episodes, we would be covering issues related to Latin American region. But let's first have a look at the headlines. Kenya to launch first satellite. Bangladesh asks for Indian presence in OIC. Nigeria and China sign currency swap deal, bringing in around 15 billion Chinese yuan for 720 billion Nigerian naira. EU discloses new data privacy rules after Facebook fiasco. China-US trade talks again falter. Beijing sends their trade minister to Washington. Russia cuts oil exports to Europe and ramps up trade with China. Now we pick up some of the key developments. Vice President of India is in one of the most vibrant regions of this world, the Latin American region. Let's discuss about it in across the globe. In Across the Globe, today we are going to discuss Vice President's visit to the Latin American region, 3 important countries he's visiting, but we would be exploring many more ideas in terms of how Latin America and India are going to partner some of the important areas largely in terms of global governance, bilateral trade, investment, technology partnership, and many more issues. Let's have a look at this report.
India's foreign policy push under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj will be seen this week when Prime Minister travels to Nepal and Bangladesh and External Affairs Minister pays a visit to Myanmar. India's Vice President Venkaiah Naidu is already on a 3-country, 5-day tour of Central and South American nations of Guatemala, Panama and Peru. This is Vice President's first overseas visit after assuming office. The Vice President will have over 25 engagements. These include meetings and discussions with presidents, vice presidents and presiding officers of these 3 countries, delegation-level talks, addressing local Indian communities and students of academic institutions besides visiting historical sites and places. In Guatemala, this is the highest-level visit from either side. The visit focused on various areas of mutual cooperation such as protection of wildlife, human resource and training, and information technology among others. Panama was the first Central American nation to establish diplomatic relations with India in 1962. India looks at Panama as the link to Central and Latin American countries as it is the major logistics and financial hub and is known as the Singapore of the region. Panama has the highest presence of Indian diaspora of 15,000. Talks with Peru will cover the entire spectrum of bilateral relations, including trade, commerce, investment, IT, medicine, space, defense and culture. India-Peru bilateral trade of about $3 billion is the highest among these 3 countries.
So Guatemala, Peru and Vice President already out. The issues are in terms of what kind of priority sectors we have in terms of our partnership, what kind of issues we have on table in terms of India's expansion and India's engagement of relationship. Nothing new to begin with, but of course there are others who are already present in a major way. To discuss these issues, we are joined in the studio by Professor S. Narayan Roy, who is an eminent commentator on Latin American region, and their partnership, his books, his publications are all there with us. We are also joined by Ambassador of Venezuela, His Excellency Ambassador Augusto Montiel. Welcome, sir. We are also joined by Professor Sreeram Chaulia, who is writing on several of these issues and India's position on that. So let me first begin with you, Professor Narendra Roy, how you look at this new engagement that India is now pressing ahead with in the Latin American region. We heard of Africa, we heard of neighborhood first policy. Prime Minister visited Central Asia, and of course Europe, US, Nordic summit we just finished last month. So how you see this new emphasis and high level visit to this part of the world?
I must say that this is a very welcome and timely move, because since the Prime Minister visited extensively to the rest of the world, particularly Africa, and not just Prime Minister but also President and Vice President, and then some of us who have been working on writing on Latin America, we're getting a little worried that how is it that Latin America is not getting the kind of attention. So we are very happy that now it is beginning with the three-nation visit by the Vice President, and some of the other ministerial visits have also happened here and there, and hopefully a major visit to that part of the world should be taken up by the Prime Minister, because that region urgently needs our attention.
That would be happening with the G20 meeting later this year.
Yeah.
So with Buenos Aires G20 summit coming up, Prime Minister would be in that part of the world.
Yeah.
But what kind of issues you see, because Vice President Venkaiah Naidu brings in that vibrance that democracy brings in, and he brings in several of the experiences that he had as urban affairs minister, Minister for Rural Development. So he has that knack of connecting with people in other countries. So how you see that happening across these countries?
Yeah, you see, for the last several years, Latin America has realized the importance of rising India. And that being the case, and also because of the context in which Latin American countries are able to now deal more autonomously in terms of their policy engagement and policy decisions with rest of the world, now that they are no more so much dependent on the United States. So that being the case, most of the Latin American countries, even the very small ones, have opened up diplomatic missions in Delhi. Of course, we have not been able to do as many, but then we have definitely increased our engagement. Now that is a new perspective. Another thing is that Latin America, we are dealing with new Latin America, a Latin America which is now fully democratized, Latin America which has seen the advent of many new political parties and groups, new experiments in governance in terms of deepening democracy, in terms of social measures, and also the kind of stability that it can talk of. Now that is the new vibrant Latin America, which was badly looking towards countries like India, and I'm very happy that this engagement is happening at such a stage.
Montiel, President and Vice President is not in Venezuela, but in very much in your own neighborhood. How you see this growing importance in the government's own landscape? Prime Minister would be visiting later this year. How you see Latin America figuring in our conversations here?
The whole engagement between India and Latin America is at this moment beginning a new era of important levels of enhancement. This visit by Vice President Venkaiah Naidu, Sri Venkaiah Naidu, Honorable, is an excellent moment for getting people-to-people contact and getting the Indian public opinion to find out about how near Latin America is in terms of markets, in terms of raw materials markets, in terms of culture, in terms of something very important, the construction of a multipolar world. If India, and certainly India, is not only an emerging economy, it's a leader in the world, and leaders and the position of Prime Minister Modi has been clearly lately expressed that we have to go for a multipolar world where balance and peace can be at the corner of anybody's life. And Latin America, the plurality of Latin American expressions, countries, politics, and the existence nowadays of a Latin American community. Latin American CELAC is called, CELAC, the Community of States of the Latin American and Caribbean region. Now, engaging with India, certainly last year, we had together with India the coming along of new plans.
That's right.
And we are very happy indeed. Not only Prime Minister, but I think very soon there will also be news about higher level engagement between India and the Latin American region.
That's right. And that brings me to Professor Sreeram Chaulia, the larger geopolitics of this, as Excellency was mentioning, in terms of engagement at the higher level, at the senior level, but also bringing in the dynamics of people to people, and also the presence of a multipolar world. How Latin American and Indian relationship is evolving in that backdrop.
Sachin, the Vice President was clear that that we have to try to increase and expand our influence in that region. He mentioned China explicitly and said that they are much ahead of us in that region. They are the #1 trading partner with almost all the countries in the region. The second interesting part is the focus is not only on the South American continent, but also on the Central American region. So Guatemala is there and Panama is there. And it's interesting that Guatemala is one of the few countries that has not recognized China and continues to be with Taiwan. So there are a few such. Of course, Panama, Nicaragua is where the Chinese presence is much bigger. So I think as Ambassador was saying, for India to be a leading power, as Prime Minister Modi says, we have to have what I call like a 360 degrees approach to every corner. And that we have been relatively far more successful in the last 4 years than we were before, because there was a lot of neglect of smaller countries, and I think we are trying to fill that. For a Vice President to spend time in tiny countries like Panama or Guatemala, it sends a message. Of course, Peru is much bigger.
Do you see a sort of world vision coming in when Prime Minister is trying to bring in all countries in this? India is world's largest and fastest growing economy. In this effort, he is trying to bring in many more actors connecting with our growth process.
Yeah, I think, see, every drop counts in the ocean, and I think the way we are trying to approach is to show our presence. That's important, right? We have also a diaspora community. Panama, I believe, has 15,000 or so who went, generations ago to build the canal in the 19th century. And now, with the new kind of migrants going, I think there is a diaspora, small community, not as large as you have in Africa or in Europe. But I think the idea is to galvanize all those and to create conditions for India to be seen as an actor, because it's not just trade and commerce. Of course, those are central and investment, but I think they are also trying to leverage those connections, and possibly, some Latin American navies participated in our fleet review in Visakhapatnam some time ago. So we want to try and bring in some strategic component to this, because it cannot simply be left only to trade and investment. And the politics in the region is changing. Many governments are shifting from left to right, and yet there are some established socialist governments still there, and we have to have this multi-pronged approach to all of them and bring them together. CELAC is a great example where we are. There's also the Pacific Coalition.
This realism, Sreeram, which is coming in Indian foreign policy, where you are engaging with governments which are socialist, as you rightly said, which are more democratic. Some of them are rightist, some of them are extreme leftist. How you see this balancing, as Professor Ashnarayan Roy was mentioning, that this balancing act is extremely important?
I think, Sachinji, we are looking at the people of these countries, and we are less judgmental about the regimes, and we have often not taken a stand that plays into a larger Western agenda to undermine these regimes. At the same time, we are seeing how the economic linkages can bring about grassroots change in these societies, and how we can, for example, capacity building is one of our strengths.
That's right.
So those are the means by which I think we have done that more successful in Africa, but now it's time to do the same in Latin America.
We would have to stop here for a break. Don't go away. Our analysis of Latin America-India engagement would continue.
क्या होगा प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी के विदेश दौरों का असर?
संयुक्त राष्ट्र संघ की पहचान पत्र वाले 14,000 रोहिंग्या भारत में रह रहे हैं।
सीरियस समस्या को लेकर क्या बट रहा है विश्व?
क्या अमेरिका और चीन के बीच व्यापारिक रिश्तों में जारी तनातनी से ट्रेड वार की स्थिति बनने जा रही है?
राष्ट्रीय अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मुद्दों पर गंभीर चर्चा और सटीक विश्लेषण। इनसाइट।
Welcome back. In this component of our program, we bring special reports to you which are not in the headlines. We call this Beyond the News. As Excellency mentioned, ECLAC is an important organization for Latin American countries, which is a regional UN platform. Their summit is happening in Cuba. Let's have a look at this report.
37th session of Economic Commission for Latin America and Caribbean ECLAC is in progress in Havana, Cuba from 7th to 11th May. ECLAC has called out for advancing on regional integration and development with equality, inclusiveness and social justice. There have also been calls to invert the 1% wealth pyramid in the region. Various leaders showcased strong commitment towards the phrase, no development without peace, no peace without development. Also, a special panel will take place on the challenges of middle-income countries ahead of the second high-level United Nations conference on South-South cooperation. India has emerged as an important player in the world trade, but its importance in Latin America and Caribbean has been much lower than several other competing countries in the region. In recent years, India has accorded priority to this region in its trade policy despite important constraints such as physical distance and low level of ongoing economic engagement with the region. Trade between India and LAC has improved. It has grown from $5 billion to $24.5 billion in 2016-17. The balance of trade is not in India's favor because India imports crude oil, minerals from LAC. In 2016-17, India's exports to LAC was $7.2 billion and imports from LAC was $17.3 billion. India is doing well in export of automobiles, 2- and 4-wheelers, auto parts, pharmaceutical and engineering goods to LAC. India is importing crude oil, edible oil and copper from LAC.
So, Latin American and Caribbean countries. As I was mentioning to you, the 37th session of Economic Commission for Latin America and Caribbean, they have started their meeting in Cuba. ECLAC was once a leader with Raul Prabesque defining the contours of South-South cooperation. And this one important entity actually was ahead of its time in terms of how macroeconomic policies of the region should be shaped. And this task is back, as the Cuban president in his inaugural address at the summit yesterday said that neoliberal policies have occupied a space in last so many years that the endogeneity in the growth process has got completely displaced. And the countries would have to make efforts to get that back on track. And this requires more job creation, this requires value addition, and it also requires new technologies. So, Professor Ashnaran Roy, let me come back to you. You have seen Latin American region very closely. You have spent time there. How you see ECLAC enabling this analysis? South-South cooperation has been forte for Latin American region and of course for Caribbean countries. How you see this new energy coming in the Latin American region?
I think if I can say with some sense of responsibility, Latin America in the past had taken lead in terms of many of these innovative schemes that the developing countries came out with. It became a kind of a laboratory for new experiments and things of the kind, and this is where some of these concepts originally were born there. We are very happy that finally, I think, as you very rightly explained, that this is the opportunity to kind of resurrect that kind of a perspective from ECLAC. And we are happy that the theme is fight against inequality.
That's right.
Because that is exactly what is needed, because Latin America and many of our countries, it is the growing divide between rich and poor, which is becoming a major threat. And that being the case, it's right that the Havana conference has decided to take up this issue of inequality. And that is very much possible when we have the right kind of a strategy for development in terms of state continue to be an important player, particularly in terms of infrastructure development, education, health and others. At the same time, the private sector has its own dynamism, and it has to kind of follow. So that being the case, I'm very happy and hopeful that that ECLAC hopefully will be able to kind of take the lead, and many other regions will be able to do that, because some of the other issues that they are going to fight is in terms of sustainability, in terms of kind of environmental protection, where Latin America has come out with very interesting models in terms of giving power to the indigenous groups and things of the kind in all that.
Ambassador Montiel, I must ask you this question, as Sreeram was mentioning in the previous round of our discussion, that Latin American region has also seen changes, and in last 2 decades many governments have changed, and they have changed from one extreme to other. So from pure leftist to pure right, or pure right to pure left. This kind of change is happening. Costa Rica and others, you are seeing they are going through a phase where unrest is there. Some violence eruptions are also there in some parts of Latin American region. How you see the macro picture coming in, and as Professor S. Narayan Roy explained, the inequalities have fueled some of the unrest there. How you see efforts by international community, efforts by local leaders and countries and people themselves in terms of overcoming some of the impediments in the growth process. As I mentioned, Excellency, this region is a leader for South-South cooperation. Next year, in this very region, we would be celebrating 40 years of Buenos Aires Plan of Action, the BAPA 40.
Certainly. Well, I would say that the world's politics, world's geostrategy, world development, world's lessons in terms of how inclusive a world can be, how equitable, how sustainable, how tolerant a world can become for all, is the question that the United Nations, specialized agencies like ECLAC and other institutions around the world have been employing and using resources to come to terms with world balances and peace. What is the idea of the United Nations? So that most countries can, according to civilization, and the United Nations has been the most specific tool for understanding around the world. There's nothing else but the United Nations. So understanding between countries, that every country takes a step forward in politics, in economics, in the political arena, the social arena, and the economic arena. Everybody has to learn from everybody. And I think if the World Bank, if the United Nations Development Program, if all international organizations have said that, for example, in the 90s, neoliberalism proved that it was leaving a whole spectrum of dead people around the world, and teachings have also come to terms with the fact that a state is a state to care and to cater for certain needs of society, and the market is there to cater for the needs of society in production, in efficiency, and so on. Therefore, we can all use the teachings of humanity and of social sciences and the specific sciences to know that Latin America, Asia, Africa need development for their people to live a more inclusive, equitable, sustainable, and tolerant world. And the North, the countries in the North, can not only help but must obey the principles of the United Nations, which is respect.
How easy is that, Sreeram? You have seen the evolution of the global world order. We have been discussing issues related to sustainable development goals, the conflicts that are coming in, the prescriptions that we get from global institutions. How you look at it?
Well, Sachin, there have been some very unfortunate developments in Latin America, as we know, lately. Nicaragua, there is an uprising against President Ortega. Venezuela has been having problems. There is, the whole question of the Cuban, rapprochement with the US. Trump has more or less reversed everything. So some of the dark clouds are hanging.
That's right.
And the question really is how we can do it, through ECLAC and such institutions have technical advice and economic suggestions, but the ground reality is that there is a shift. I see this as a major transition going on. So what will come after that? I don't think extreme right is ever going to come, because the achievements of the left are there. So you have a kind of center right, like Mauricio Macri in Argentina. You cannot call a far right, So I don't think you're going to see extreme populist right wing like you're seeing in Europe or in North America. It's still going to be a kind of so the human capitalism idea of ECLAC is in a way embedded now in the politics, and I don't think it's going to go away.
And Sreeram, this week we have picked up a book that you recommended. So let's pick up Book of the Week. So Sreeram, why don't you tell us about this book
Sachin,
that we are going to discuss?
Eduardo Galeano was an Uruguayan journalist and wrote this classic work which has stood the test of time. And it's a comprehensive history of the political economy of colonialism in Latin America going back 400 years. And his point is, he divides it by century by commodities, and how commodity extraction and exploitation was the basis for the Spanish, the Portuguese, and then the Americans to ravage and plunder the continent. But in 1970s, he was writing at a time where there were right-wing dictatorships, all backed by the United States. So now, of course, as you mentioned, it's a new Latin America. It's far more independent and not completely under American, influence anymore.
Yep.
But the lessons are still relevant, because if there are attempts to do regime changes, which again go back in that direction, the CIA is notorious for activities in that region. We cannot discount that. So therefore, I think eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, as it says, and Galeano shows that in this book.
Would you like to add something? Just half a minute.
Yes, democracy is there for the many. Democracy is there to be able to be a magnifying glass for the needs of the many.
Great.
That's what democracy is there.
That's coming from you, Professor Narendra.
Well, let me also add my perspective on the book.
Yeah.
One of the leading newspapers of Mexico, La Jornada, that is the journal, wrote after Galeano's death that the invisible have lost their chronicler. And I think
excellent.
This is something
on this comment.
In 5 seconds.
Excellency.
Unfortunately, Washington government is there back again using violence against the countries of Latin America and violating all the principles of self-determination and non-interference in internal matters.
Excellent, Excellency, Ambassador Montiel. We would have to close this session.
Yes.
Thanks, Professor Narendra.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sreeram. Please continue to remain with us, write to us about the program, and keep on watching this program. Thank you.